The Ledger of Dreams. In the small town of Crestview, Ohio, where the cornfield stretched like an endless sea under a sky bruised with the colors of dusk, Clara Hensley sat at her kitchen table, her fingers tracing the edges of a worn ledger. The year was 2027, and the world outside her window felt like it was teetering on the edge of something vast and unnameable. The radio hummed in the background, a news anchor's voice cutting through the static. The U.S. national debt has surpassed $37 trillion, years ahead of projections, sparking heated debates over the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Clara, a 38-year-old single mother of two, barely registered the words. Numbers like that, trillions, felt like stars in the sky, distant, incomprehensible, and irrelevant to the immediate ache of her life. Her son, Ethan, 16, was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone, while her daughter, Lily, 10, colored furiously at the table, her crayons scratching out a world where houses had wings and the sun never set. "Mom, we are out of milk again," Ethan called, not looking up. Clara sighed, flipping through the ledger. It wasn't a fancy spreadsheet, just a spiral notebook where she tracked every dollar that came in and went out. Her job at the local hardware store paid $15 an hour, enough to keep the lights on but not enough to stop the slow bleed of their savings. The ledger told a story of its own. $200 for groceries, $75 for the electric bill, $300 for the car repair last month. And then there was the medical bill, $500 for Lily's asthma treatment, still unpaid, looming like a storm cloud. "Mom." Lily's voice broke through her thoughts. "Why do you look so sad?" Clara forced a smile. "Just thinking, sweetheart. About numbers." "Numbers are boring," Lily said, returning to her drawing. Clara wished it were that simple. The news droned on about the national debt, about politicians arguing over the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, a proposed legislation that promised to consolidate federal spending into a single, streamlined bill to address the ballooning deficit. Some called it a bold solution, others, a reckless gamble. Clara didn't care much for politics, but she felt the weight of it all, the way the world's problems seemed to seep into her own, like water through a cracked foundation. Across town, at the Crestview Community Center, Marcus Tate was pacing the stage, his voice booming through a microphone. Marcus, 45, was a former accountant turned community activist, a man with a knack for turning numbers into stories. He was hosting a town hall meeting, trying to explain what $37 trillion meant to people like Clara, people who didn't have the luxury of ignoring it. "Folks," Marcus said, his eyes scanning the sparse crowd, "this debt isn't just a number. It's a promise we are making to our kids, and their kids. Every dollar we borrow today is a dollar they'll have to pay back tomorrow, with interest. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act might sound like a fix, but it's a band-aid on a broken leg. We need to talk about what this means for us, right here in Crestview." In the front row, Sarah Nguyen, a 27-year-old journalist for the Crestview Chronicle, scribbled notes. She'd been covering the debt crisis for months, trying to make sense of it for her readers. But the story felt too big, too abstract. She needed a human face, a way to make the numbers real. Her editor had given her a deadline: find a story that would make people care, or her piece would be buried on page 10. Sarah's eyes landed on Clara, who had slipped into the back of the room, dragged there by a neighbor who insisted she needed to get involved. Clara looked tired, her arms crossed, her mind clearly elsewhere. Sarah jotted down, "Single mom, ledger in hand, looks like she carries the weight of the world." Chapter 2. The Ripple Effect. The next morning, Clara woke to a letter from the bank. Her mortgage payment was going up, again. Interest rates had spiked, a ripple effect of the government's borrowing, the news said. She stared at the new number, $1,200 a month, up from $950. She did the math in her head. 40 hours a week at $15 an hour, minus taxes, minus bills, minus groceries. It didn't add up. At the hardware store, her boss, Mr. Callahan, was grumbling about his own problems. "Supply costs are through the roof," he said, tossing a clipboard onto the counter. "Inflation's killing us. If this keeps up, I might have to cut hours." Clara's stomach twisted. Fewer hours meant less money, and less money meant, what? Selling the house? Moving in with her sister in Toledo? She couldn't uproot Ethan and Lily, not when they were already struggling to adjust after their father left 5 years ago. That evening, Sarah showed up at Clara's doorstep, notebook in hand. "I saw you at the town hall," she said, her voice earnest. I'm writing a story about how the national debt affects regular people. Can I talk to you? Clara hesitated. She wasn't one for attention, but something in Sarah's eyes, genuine curiosity, maybe hope, made her nod. They sat at the kitchen table, Lily coloring nearby, Ethan's music blaring from his room. It's not just the debt, Clara said, her voice low. It's everything. The prices, the bills, the way it feels like we are all running on a treadmill that keeps speeding up. I don't know what this one big beautiful bill thing is, but it doesn't feel like it's going to help me. Sarah scribbled furiously. Can you tell me more? About what keeps you up at night? Clara laughed, a bitter sound. Everything. My daughter's inhalers cost more than my car payment. My son wants to go to college, but I can't afford it. And now the mortgage, she trailed off, her eyes glistening. I just want them to have a future, you know? Not this weight. Sarah nodded, her heart aching. This was the story she needed. Not just numbers, but a mother's fear, a family struggle. She spent hours with Clara, listening as the older woman poured out her worries, her dreams, her quiet resilience. By the time Sarah left, she had pages of notes and a fire in her chest. This wasn't just a story. It was a call to action. Chapter 3, The Town Hall. Marcus Tate was losing patience. The town hall meetings were drawing fewer people each week, and the ones who showed up seemed more interested in arguing than listening. He'd spent years crunching numbers, first as an accountant, then as an activist, but he'd never felt so helpless. The national debt was a tidal wave, and Crestview was just a speck on the shore. He called Sarah after reading her latest article, a profile on Clara that had gone viral in the county. You've got a gift, he told her. You made people feel something. Now we need to get them to do something. Sarah agreed to help organize a bigger town hall, one that would bring in experts, politicians, and everyday people like Clara. They booked the high school auditorium, plastered flyers around town, and begged the local TV station to cover it. Marcus even convinced a congresswoman, Representative Elena Martinez, to attend. Martinez was a co-sponsor of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and her presence would draw a crowd. The night of the town hall, the auditorium was packed. Clara sat in the third row, Ethan and Lily beside her, both dragged along against their will. Sarah was in the wings, her camera ready to capture the event for the Chronicle. Marcus took the stage, his voice steady but urgent. Tonight, we are not just talking about numbers, he said. We are talking about people. People like Clara Hensley, who's here with her kids, wondering how she'll pay her bills. People like you, who feel the squeeze every time you go to the grocery store. The national debt isn't just a Washington problem, it's our problem. Representative Martinez spoke next, outlining the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. It was a bold plan, she said, to streamline federal spending, cut waste, and invest in infrastructure and education to boost the economy. We can't keep kicking this can down the road, she said. Our children deserve better. But the crowd wasn't sold. A man in the back shouted, "What about taxes? You gonna raise 'em again?" A woman near Clara stood up, her voice shaking. I'm a nurse. I can't afford my own health care. How's this bill gonna help me? Clara felt a lump in her throat. She wanted to stand, to say something, but fear held her back. Then Lily tugged at her sleeve. Mom, you should talk. You're good at talking. Clara's heart raced. She wasn't a speaker, wasn't a hero. But she thought of Lily's drawings, Ethan's dreams of college, the ledger that never balanced. She stood, her hands trembling. I'm Clara Hensley, she said, her voice cracking at first but growing stronger. I don't know much about trillions of dollars or fancy bills, but I know what it's like to lie awake at night, wondering if I'm failing my kids. I know what it's like to choose between medicine and food. If this debt means my kids will have to carry an even heavier load, then I want to know what we are doing about it. Not tomorrow, not in 10 years, now. The room fell silent, then erupted in applause. Sarah's camera clicked, capturing Clara's face, tired, fierce, human. Ethan stared at his mom, pride flickering in his eyes. Lily squeezed her hand. Chapter 4, The Ripple Becomes a Wave. Clara's speech changed everything. Sarah's article, paired with a video of the town hall, spread across social media, picked up by national outlets. Clara became a reluctant symbol, the Crestview mom who put a face to the debt crisis. Strangers sent her letters, some with small donations, others with stories of their own struggles. She hated the attention but couldn't deny its power. Marcus and Sarah teamed up to keep the momentum going. They organized more town halls, not just in Crestview but across Ohio, then neighboring states. Clara spoke at a few, her voice steadier each time. She didn't have solutions, but she had truth, and that was enough to make people listen. Representative Martinez invited Clara to Washington to testify before Congress about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Clara was terrified, but Ethan and Lily convinced her to go. "You're doing it for us," Ethan said, his usual teenage sarcasm replaced by something softer. In D.C., Clara sat before a panel of lawmakers, her ledger in her lap. She didn't talk about trillions or deficits. She talked about her kids, her town, her fears. "I'm not an expert," she said, "but I know what it feels like to drown in numbers. If this bill can help people like me, I'm all for it. But if it's just more promises, more debt for my kids to carry, then it's not enough." The room was quiet, the lawmakers' faces unreadable. But Sarah, watching from the press gallery, knew Clara had done something extraordinary. She'd made the debt personal, not just a headline but a human story. Chapter 5, The Future We Choose. Back in Crestview, the town was changing. The town halls had sparked a grassroots movement, with neighbors helping neighbors, sharing groceries, carpooling to save gas, even starting a community fund for medical bills. Clara's ledger still didn't balance, but the weight felt lighter, shared by a community that refused to let her fall. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act passed, but not without changes. Clara's testimony, along with pressure from towns like Crestview, forced lawmakers to add protections for working families, caps on interest rate hikes, subsidies for healthcare, investments in local schools. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Sarah's articles won awards, but she cared more about the people she'd met, the stories she told. Marcus ran for mayor, promising to keep Crestview's voice loud. Ethan started a blog about the debt crisis, channeling his teenage angst into something bigger. Lily kept drawing, her houses now grounded but surrounded by fields of hope. Clara stood in her backyard one evening, watching the sunset paint the cornfields gold. The radio was off, the ledger tucked away. She didn't know if the debt would ever shrink, if the world would ever feel steady again. But she knew she'd found her voice, and her kids had seen it. That was enough for now. The stars began to appear, each one a promise, a debt to the future. Clara took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "We'll carry it together."